Every love story has a hidden truth, and every heart hides a lie. Sometimes the things we leave unsaid are the ones that haunt us the most. Diary of love and lies. Stories that feel real because they are.
My name is Nathan, and I am 29 years old now. The story I'm about to tell began 3 years ago when I was 26. At that time, I had just come back on vacation from Dubai, where I worked. Those days were extremely difficult for me because about a month earlier, the girl I loved deeply had married someone else. The fault wasn't hers. My family had refused the proposal when it came, and because of that, everything fell apart. After that, I felt distant from my family and spent most of my time outside the house. Sometimes I hung out with friends, but most of the time I would sit alone in Liberty Park in Riverside, California, thinking about how things had gone wrong. There was also another complicated situation in my family. My mother had a sister, Aunt Samantha, with whom our family had not spoken for many years. Since childhood, I had only heard about the disagreements between the families, and we never visited them. But while I was in Dubai, somehow I connected with Aunt Samantha through Facebook. Slowly, we started chatting. She was surprisingly friendly and warm. I remembered seeing her once or twice at old family events when I was younger, but never really talking to her. One morning during my vacation, I suddenly decided to visit her. I got on my bike and headed toward the Riverside bypass area. I didn't know her exact address, so I called her and she patiently guided me through the streets until I finally reached her house. She was about 43 years old and had 5 children, 3 daughters and 2 sons. Her husband worked in Houston and came home only occasionally. One of her daughters was already married, another was in high school, and the others were younger. When she opened the door and saw me, she hugged me warmly as if we had never been apart. We sat together, talked for a long time, and she insisted I stay for lunch. Seeing her properly that day surprised me. She was tall, graceful, with long hair and expressive eyes. She carried herself with the elegance of someone who might easily pass for a film actress. While we were talking, she mentioned another relative, her niece Alyssa. She told me Alyssa had gone through a very difficult life. She had married very young. Her first husband had died, leaving her with a son. Later she remarried, but that marriage also ended in divorce. Now she lived alone with her child in a rented upper-floor apartment in a small neighborhood called the Maple District in Riverside. Aunt Samantha said she planned to visit Alyssa in a few days and promised she would call me if I wanted to come along and meet her. At that time I imagined Alyssa as someone much older, maybe an aunt-type woman with a teenage son. I didn't think much about it except feeling sorry for her situation. A few days later, Aunt Samantha called and told me she was already at Alyssa's place and that I should come by. It was a cold winter afternoon. After getting ready, I reached the neighborhood around noon. The streets were narrow and confusing, so I called again. Soon a teenage boy came out to guide me inside. He was Alyssa's son, about 14 years old. The house was on the upper floor of a small rented building. We climbed an iron staircase outside. The entrance opened into a small room that served both as a living room and bedroom, with a bed in the corner and a small bathroom attached. Beyond that was a tiny hall with an open kitchen and another small room at the end. When I passed the kitchen on my way to the roof, I briefly noticed a young woman inside, but I didn't pay attention. I assumed she was a neighbor. On the rooftop, Aunt Samantha was sitting on a mat in the winter sun beside a sewing machine, working on some clothes. We greeted each other and began chatting. After a moment, footsteps approached from the stairs. The woman who appeared was Alyssa. For a second, I genuinely forgot what I had expected. The aunt-like woman I imagined turned out to be a tall, graceful 30-year-old who looked almost like a younger version of Aunt Samantha. Her long hair was tied loosely behind her shoulders, and she carried herself with a quiet dignity. There was a soft calmness in her eyes, and she kept her gaze lowered in a modest way that made her seem even more gentle. We sat together on the roof and started talking. She told me her life story openly. She had married at 16, and within a year she had her son. After her husband died, she struggled alone for years before trying marriage again, but that relationship didn't last. Now she worked at a small private elementary school, helping manage younger children since she had studied only until 10th grade. In addition to that, she also earned money by sewing clothes for people in the neighborhood. Despite everything she had been through, Alyssa seemed calm, polite, and incredibly kind. She never complained about life, and she spoke with quiet strength. Something about her presence made me feel comfortable very quickly. After spending the afternoon there, I returned home, but that night I kept thinking about her story and her smile. A few days later, when I dropped Aunt Samantha at the Greyhound station so she could travel back to San Diego, I casually asked her for Alyssa's phone number. She hesitated before giving it to me and warned me seriously. "Don't say anything inappropriate to her," she said. "She's a very decent woman." I assured her I would respect that. That night, I sent Alyssa a simple text saying hello. After waiting for a while with no reply, I finally called. She answered cautiously, asking who it was. When I told her my name and reminded her about our meeting earlier that day, she sounded a little embarrassed but friendly. "I don't usually talk to many people," she admitted. Our conversations remained simple at first. I would call her at night, and we would talk about life, her struggles, my job abroad, the heartbreak I had recently gone through. I often praised her strength and kindness, and like most people, she seemed to appreciate sincere compliments. Within a week, she felt comfortable enough to welcome me to her house as a friend. One evening, I brought pizza for her kids, which instantly made me popular with them. On the phone, I could joke freely, but whenever I sat in front of her in person, my confidence mysteriously disappeared. Around that time, she also started attending a short training program at a nearby government office, and sometimes I would pick her up afterward. One day, her friend Maya joined us for the ride home because her usual ride hadn't arrived. During the drive, Maya teased me playfully and clearly tried to flirt. I could sense that Alyssa didn't like it at all. When we dropped Maya off, Alyssa jokingly asked if I wanted her number. I laughed and shook my head. No thanks. She was the one flirting, not me. From that day on, I noticed a subtle change in Alyssa. She began worrying about me, asking if I had eaten, if I had returned home safely. Her friends even teased her about me sometimes, which made her blush. Slowly, without realizing it, I had started caring for her too. A month passed like this. Calls every night. Small meetings during the day. I began thinking seriously about telling her how I felt. One evening, I invited her out for ice cream. We walked through Riverside Garden Park, talking about ordinary things. I could sense she was waiting for me to say something important, but every time the words reached my lips, I lost my nerve. So we went home without me saying anything. The next night, I visited her again. We had dinner together while her children watched TV. Eventually, they fell asleep on the couch. The room grew quiet except for the soft hum of the heater. Alyssa and I sat facing each other across two chairs. For the first time, I felt brave enough. "Alyssa," I said softly, "I think I've fallen in love with you." She looked shocked and immediately shook her head. "Don't say things like that," she replied. "My son is almost grown up. I don't want gossip or trouble." But I could see that her reaction was more fear than rejection. I moved a little closer and gently took her hands in mine. She didn't pull them away, though she looked nervous. "I mean it," I said quietly. "You deserve happiness. I respect you too much to ever let anyone hurt your reputation." For a moment she stayed silent, her eyes lowered, thinking deeply. The warmth of the heater, the stillness of the night, and the closeness between us created a strange, tender tension in the air. I squeezed her hand softly and whispered again, "I love you, Alyssa." She didn't answer immediately, but she didn't pull her hands away either. Alyssa stayed silent for several seconds. The room felt warmer than before, not just because of the heater, but because of the tension between us. Her hands were still in mine, soft and slightly trembling. I could see that she was thinking carefully about what to say. Finally, she spoke in a low voice. "Nathan, what we're doing right now isn't right." Her words sounded firm, but her tone wasn't angry. It sounded more like someone trying to protect herself from something she secretly wanted. I leaned a little closer. "Why isn't it right?" I asked gently. She looked toward the couch where her son was sleeping and then back at me. "My life is already complicated," she said quietly. "I've been through enough. People in this neighborhood already talk too much. I don't want another mistake." I understood her fear. A woman who had already faced so many hardships couldn't afford another scandal. "I'm not playing games with you," I said. "I'm serious about what I'm saying." For a moment, she looked directly into my eyes. It was the first time she held my gaze that confidently. Something unspoken passed between us in that moment. Then she slowly pulled one of her hands free, but the other remained in mine. "Nathan," she said softly, "you're younger than me. One day you'll go back abroad. Your life will move forward. But what about me? Her question was honest, and it made me pause. I don't know what the future holds, I admitted. But I know that right now I care about you. She looked down again, and I could see the conflict on her face. Her heart and mind were clearly fighting with each other. After a few seconds, she tried to stand up. It's getting late, she said. You should go home. But before she could walk away, I gently held her wrist. Alyssa, just tell me one thing, I said. Do you feel nothing for me? She stopped moving. For several seconds, she didn't answer. Then she slowly turned back toward me. I didn't say that, she whispered. That single sentence felt like a door opening. I stood up and stepped closer to her. We were only a foot apart now. I could hear her breathing clearly, and the faint fragrance of her shampoo filled the air. Nathan, she murmured nervously. I lifted my hand and gently touched her cheek. She froze at first, but she didn't step back. Her eyes closed for a brief moment, as if she was surrendering to a feeling she had been trying to suppress. You're a good woman, I said softly, and I don't want to hurt you. She exhaled slowly. I'm scared, she admitted. Of what? I asked. Of trusting someone again. Her words carried years of pain behind them. Without thinking, I pulled her slightly closer and wrapped my arms around her shoulders. For a second, she stiffened in surprise, but then her body slowly relaxed against mine. It wasn't a passionate embrace. It was warm, comforting, almost healing. After a moment, she gently pushed me back. This shouldn't happen, she said, though her voice had softened. But it already has, I replied with a small smile. She looked at me, and for the first time that night, a faint smile appeared on her lips too. You're very stubborn, she said. Only when something matters to me. We sat down again, but this time much closer than before. Our shoulders almost touched. The conversation continued quietly, but the atmosphere between us had changed completely. Now there was an undeniable closeness. At one point, she laughed at something I said and lightly hit my arm. The playful gesture felt surprisingly intimate. When she realized it, she quickly pulled her hand back, slightly embarrassed. You see, she said teasingly. This is exactly how trouble starts. I leaned toward her a little. Maybe some trouble is worth it. She shook her head, smiling nervously. You really don't give up, do you? No, I replied. For a while we just sat there quietly. Outside, the cold winter night had grown deeper. Inside, the small room felt warm and peaceful. Then suddenly she stood up again. Nathan, you really should leave now, she said. If my son wakes up and sees us talking like this, he'll start asking questions. She was right. I grabbed my jacket and moved toward the door. But before leaving, I turned back to look at her one more time. Alyssa, I said. Yes? This isn't over. She folded her arms and raised an eyebrow. What does that mean? It means I'm not going to pretend tonight didn't happen. For a second, she looked like she wanted to argue, but instead she sighed. You're impossible. I walked toward the door, but just before stepping outside, I heard her voice again. Nathan. I turned around. She was standing near the heater, her long hair falling loosely over her shoulders. The soft yellow light made her look even more beautiful than before. Drive safely, she said quietly. That simple sentence carried more care than any long speech. I smiled. I will. As I rode my bike through the cold streets of Riverside that night, my heart felt lighter than it had in months. The pain of losing my old love had slowly faded, replaced by a new, unexpected feeling. But deep down I also knew something important. Alyssa's heart had begun to open, but winning her completely would not be easy. When I rode my bike home that night, the cold wind of the Riverside streets hit my face, but inside I felt strangely warm. Alyssa's words and the way she looked at me kept replaying in my mind. She hadn't said she loved me, but she hadn't rejected me either. From the next day, things between us quietly changed. Our nightly calls became longer. Earlier, we used to talk about ordinary things, her school, my job abroad, daily routines. But now our conversations had emotion in them. Sometimes we would just stay on the phone silently, listening to each other breathe. One evening she suddenly asked, "Nathan, are you serious about me?" Her question came unexpectedly. "Why would you ask that?" I replied. "Because I don't want another broken chapter in my life," she said softly. "If I let someone come close again, I need to know it's real." Her honesty touched me. "I wouldn't risk your trust if I wasn't serious," I answered. After that night, she became slightly more open with me. She even started teasing me occasionally, but still, there was a boundary between us. About 2 weeks later, something happened that changed everything. It was another cold evening when I visited her house. Her son had gone to stay the night with a friend, and for the first time, Lissa and I were completely alone. When I arrived, she opened the door wearing a simple sweater and loose hair. She looked relaxed, different from her usual careful self. "You came quickly today," she said with a smile. "I always do," I replied. We sat together near the heater again, just like that first night. She made coffee for both of us, and we started talking. At first the conversation was normal, but gradually it became deeper. She told me about the loneliness she had felt after her second divorce. She admitted that sometimes she cried at night, worrying about her son's future. Listening to her, I realized how strong she had been all these years. Without thinking, I reached out and held her hand again. This time she didn't hesitate. Instead, she slowly tightened her fingers around mine. "Nathan," she said quietly, "I tried to stay away from this feeling." "Then why didn't you?" I asked gently. She looked at me with a soft, vulnerable expression. "Because when you're around, I feel safe." Her words sent a rush of warmth through me. I moved a little closer to her, and she didn't step back. The distance between us disappeared. For a moment, we just looked at each other. Her eyes were calm, but emotional. Then she whispered, almost nervously, "You're changing my life again." I smiled softly. "Maybe your life needed a little change." She shook her head but didn't argue. Slowly, I lifted my hand and brushed a strand of hair away from her face. She closed her eyes for a moment, as if enjoying the touch. Then she leaned slightly against my shoulder. That night we sat together for hours, talking, laughing, sharing small moments that felt strangely intimate. Sometimes our hands stayed intertwined. Sometimes she rested her head lightly against me. It wasn't rushed or wild. It was slow, emotional, the kind of closeness that grows when two lonely people finally find comfort in each other. When it became late, she walked me to the door again. Before leaving, I turned toward her. "So, what are we now?" I asked playfully. She smiled shyly. "I think we're two people making a risky decision." "And do you regret it?" I asked. She shook her head. "No." For the first time, she leaned forward and hugged me herself. It was a brief hug, but it meant more than any words. The day before leaving, I met Alyssa at Riverside Garden Park again, the same place where I had once been too nervous to confess my feelings. This time, things were different. We sat on a bench, watching the sunset. "You're leaving tomorrow," she said quietly. "Yes." She looked at the ground for a moment. "I'm afraid of long distances," she admitted. I took her hand. "Distance doesn't end real feelings." She looked at me carefully. "Promise me one thing." "What?" "That you won't disappear like the others did." I smiled gently. "I'm not planning to disappear." For a moment, she looked like she wanted to say something more, but instead she just hugged me again. That evening, as we walked back toward our bikes, I realized life had quietly brought someone else into my path. Someone stronger, kinder, and far more real. Sometimes love doesn't arrive the way we expect. Sometimes it appears in the middle of pain, disguised as friendship, and slowly turns into something deeper. The night before my flight to Dubai, I barely slept. Alyssa's hug at the park kept replaying in my mind again and again. For the first time in years, I felt like life was finally giving me a second chance. The next morning, I packed my bags and left for the airport. Before boarding the flight, I called her one last time. She answered almost immediately. "So our meeting wasn't really a coincidence?" "No," she admitted. At first it wasn't. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to process everything. "And now?" I asked. Her answer came quietly. Now it's real. Just then the airport announcement echoed through the hall. Final boarding call. I stood up slowly. Alyssa, one last question. Yes? If you knew all this from the start, why did you still let me come so close to you? There was a pause. Then she said something I will never forget. Because sometimes the person meant for you comes into your life through the wrong story first. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she added softly, just promise me one thing, Nathan. What? When you come back, don't come back as a visitor. I smiled slowly. I won't. The line went quiet. As I walked toward the boarding gate, one thought kept repeating in my mind. 3 years earlier, I thought I had lost the love of my life, but maybe I had simply met the wrong girl first.